Welcome to the last Global Voices reading of the season. Great audience. Glad you're all here because you're...
Closer.
Oh, closer?
Yeah.
All right. Because you're in for a treat. It's a pleasure to welcome Robert Polito to UMass Boston and to welcome him back to Boston. He is a Boston native. And actually attended our next-door neighbor, Boston College High School. Boston College High School, and Boston College and Harvard. Robert is someone who gives multitasking a good name. He's the founder and director of the New School Graduate Creative Writing Program. He is the author of a brilliant biography of the crime writer Jim Thompson called Savage Art, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award. He is the editor of several books for the Library of America, 2 volumes of noir fiction, and the new edition of the collected film criticism of one of the great American film critics, Manny Farber. But he's really here today as a poet. He's the author of 2 books, Doubles and the brand new Hollywood and God, which I don't want to spoil for you by giving too much away, but one of the most, you will hear, one of the most original, edgy, and I think profound books of poetry to appear in this country in quite some time. So a great pleasure to introduce you and introduce you to Robert Polito.
Well, thank you very much, all of you, for coming. As Lloyd suggested, this is a bit of a homecoming for me. I did go to BC High. Right behind us. My life was completely transformed there, and I grew up, I think, largely in Quincy, which I think is visible right over there. Am I talking into this sufficiently? Okay. So I'm going to be reading exclusively from a book called Hollywood and God. It combines poetry and prose, and I'll be reading mostly poems, but excerpts from 2 of the prose pieces in it. And what the book basically tracks is where the Americans search for transcendence coming out of New England and the 19th century bumps up against celebrity culture. Yeah, still?
Pull the mic down.
A little bit down? Is that better? And part of what the book is about is telling my story and other people's voices, and then telling other people's stories and what looks like my voice. And I think it helps if you think of the title as inscribing the intersection of 2 streets. So you've got Hollywood and Vine and Hollywood and Gower, and then maybe a little bit closer to where the freeway is Hollywood and God. I'll start with the title poem, though it comes late in the book, but I think it sort of focuses a lot of the things I want to talk about. Hollywood and God. If only God would save me, I would know how to hurt you. If only God would save me, I would know who to sell my soul to. Anything is an autobiography, but this is a conversation. William Burroughs insisted literature lagged 50 years behind painting, thinking no doubt about abstraction, collage, fragmentation, his cut-ups. But whatever that meant, why always 50 years? Or however he presumed to rile other writers. Poetry probably does lag behind any credible media theory of that. So that if I put a pine tree into a poem, a grove of pine trees and beyond them the sea, you'd think it was the same tree Wordsworth put there, instead of 2 obligatory centuries of nature studies, all those technicolor vistas, torch songs, couples drifting through leaves and Salem commercials. Into one life and out another. The way a junkie playing a writer playing a priest, So that when I finally blurted out, "You betrayed me, I wounded you, we're so unhappy," you assumed the burden of personal urgency. Suppose it was me speaking at the limits of my self-control, and not the damn don't cry, temptation, and leave her to heaven. You open your mouth, and a tradition dribbles out. But that's mimesis. How almost impossible to avoid mimesis. Anybody's hardest truths prompting the most fractured constructions. The way to think about God might be to disobey God, if only God's wish to remain hidden. So that if everything is an autobiography, this is a conversion. As my lives flash before me, why must the yearning for God trump all other yearnings? You often hear converts confess the drinking, his pills, her sexual addiction, concealed inside them a yearning for God. Why not the other way around? The admission of Jesus into your life, concealing instead the wish, say in need, to be fucked senseless, drunk, drugged, and screaming, oh God, on a hotel bed. God embraces our yearning. That afternoon, my father heard his diagnosis of inoperable cancer. My Aunt Barbra demanded we get him the Lord. She demanded this with a glass of vodka in her hands. She demanded this running her fingers up and down my leg. She demanded this before she passed out in her car. In the movie of my life, my father died after I forgave him. So when my secret tormentor said, "May the ghosts of your dreams gnaw at your belly like a wolf under your jacket," did she really want revenge, or was she just killing time? For me, God is a hair shirt, or he's nothing. For me, God is a pain in the ass. That's mimesis again. This hour, I tell you things in confidence. I might not tell everybody, but I'll tell you. The world is a road under the wall to the church. The world is a church, and the world is a road, and the world is a stone wall. Still, he wanted her the way the cardinal wanted the Caravaggio. And when the ill-advised possessor of the painting resisted, one night papal guards searched his house. Of course, contraband came to light, some illegal rifles. And when the ill-advised possessor of the painting went to prison, the cardinal got his Caravaggio. But I wasn't a cardinal, nephew to the Pope. And you were not a Caravaggio. So I asked you to be in my movie. This next poem is about one of the pivotal cultural icons of my childhood. And the city of the poem is Quincy, Massachusetts, as I said earlier. And it was always a great moment in Quincy Square when the actress Lee Remick arrived to visit her father's store, which was called Remick's of Quincy, as if there was like another one, maybe Remick's of Holbrook, or remember Remick's of Charlestown, though it might have been along the lines of Fredericks of Hollywood, perhaps. Mike the Winger. City of Presidents, city of the Granite Railway and Four River Shipyard. But city, too, of condoms ground into our pitcher's rubber, and city of water rats and black beaches floating in the spring runoff. City of the first Howard Johnsons, the first Dunkin' Donuts. City of Lee Remick modeling summer dresses for her father's store. And city now where Beatles albums drop from the sky, as Mike the Winger speaks from inside a circling crowd. Pockmarked, pimpled, and blazing, he looks, Tommy LeBlanc said, like someone set his face on fire and stomped it out with golf shoes. As he straddles his new black Phantom, as he rocks on his new red kids, as he pounds his wire basket of new LPs, Mike demonstrates the legendary gesture that gave him his name. I play him once, then I wing him, he says. Every afternoon, Mike spins his own top 40 from his bike, like a paperboy launching the Patriot Ledger across our lawn. Those Rolling Stones, those Beach Boys, those groups all you kids like, they're okay. But man, I love them Beatles. They wing up real good. What about his parents? Where does he grab all that cash? Nobody stops to ask, caught in the awe of the granda phenomenon. Manna from heaven. Records ease from their jackets and arced into air. Records pristine and gleaming in trees. Records scratched and gritty on streets. Amid shouts of "Go Mike, go nuts, go wingnut, come on Mikey baby, wing one over here," the hits just keep on coming. The dead are everywhere, but if Mike is still alive, he'd be tracking retirement age. Though how do you retire from something like Luna? Mere technological obsolescence? Mike frustrated by CDs, casualty to a digital age? Maybe winging records is like making movies or saying mass. You're calling. You do it until you can't do it anymore. Mike worshipped the early gods of rock and roll, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Buddy Holly. Then he winged everybody else. None of the records Mike tossed have ever gone away. Who would have guessed that? City of John Adams and John Quincy Adams, our second and sixth presidents. City of Miles Connor, rockabilly singer and art thief. City of Robert Polito. City of Mike the Winger. This next short poem is a sort of elegy for my father-in-law, who died actually 10 years ago last week on November 22nd, not a particularly well-fated day and for other reasons as well. It's called Pacific Coast Highway for Robert Harris. As in the old story, a man keeps crossing the street. The first time, his son is with him, stumbling ahead to the sidewalk behind their Jeep, parked so they could watch it from the bar. Just ahead, railroad tracks, and beyond, cottages, sand, the great Pacific. But each time the man crosses, he is struck by a black SUV, bounced onto the hood for 80 feet, and rolled another 50 down to the railbed. His son must be on the other side waiting. Again, the man crosses the street. I'm going to read an excerpt from the first of the three prose pieces in the book, and it's called Barbra Payton, the Memoir. And it's a memoir of a great B-movie actress named Barbra Payton. She's probably most famous for the Cagney film Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye. And if you had seen her in the early 1950s, you would have said she was one of the most beautiful women in Hollywood. And by the early 1960s, she looked a lot like Divine from John Waters' movies. And it's a memoir about growing up in Los Angeles in the late 50s, early 1960s. Barbra Payton, the memoir. For a few years during the early 1960s, my father tended bar at the Coach and Horses on Sunset in Hollywood. Weekdays, he inventoried the sale of stamps, money orders, and Pitney Bowes machines as supervisor of a Santa Ana post office, close to where he lived in a tidy dingbat studio. But I was about to turn 13, and he hoped to send me to a real college. The post office discouraged second jobs for government employees of his rank, so my father moonlighted only at bars, all transactions cash. The Coach and Horses lured patrons with the natty coat of arms of a British pub, but inside the landscape registered saloon. This was residential Hollywood. Cocktail lounges unattached to hotels or eateries still tended to be rare in Los Angeles, and survived on local drunks who could swing the tab. Wall drinks, 65 cents. 14 stools along a renty bar, half as many booths strung in a miniature railroad. The vibes of the Coach and Horses read dark. Dusky paneling, blackout drapes, shaded lamps. Haul in a couple of slot machines and you might feel transported to Vegas, even Barstow. The summer of 1962, my father let me join him for a Saturday stint. My parents already were separated and he took custody of me weekends. In the beginning, I was too shy to connect with anyone but him. But I loved the overheard chatter, wisecracks, complaints, the provocative fragments of confession. The silent drinkers, draining the day over the citizen news, I also admired, because they were harder to figure out. I read novels and music magazines sitting at a desk in the ruins of an office the staff tagged the Black Hole of Calcutta, up a shaky flight of stairs at the back. Or sometimes I moved to the last booth, where we covertly replaced the mood lighting with a 40-watt bulb, still too dim to menace the perpetual twilight. We made a day of it before heading off to supper and a movie. The whole experience was a lot like going to a loud library. We were 3 or 4 weeks into our routine when a day manager, probably Rodney, an occasional DJ at Hollywood high dances, started to lecture my father. He felt sorry for me, he said, rotting away doing nothing on a beautiful LA afternoon. His concern could also have betrayed the sodden departure the previous night of his latest Barbra, a 50-ish ex-race car driver fleeing overdue element. The coach and horses rotated help nearly every payday. Rodney suggested I could better occupy myself. For exactly $1 less than minimum wage, he put me to work retrieving bottles and splits, sweeping cigarettes off the black and red carpeting, soaking glasses. My father and I opened the bar Saturdays at noon. Quickly, I graduated also to Friday evening. I was too thrilled to tell my mother about my secret employment, but lied cautiously. Ralph and Leo from Holloway House stopped at the Coach and Horses evenings after work, and Leo usually returned Saturday. Back then, Holloway House, situated up on Holloway Drive, published bottom-feeder Hollywood autobiographies along the lines of Jane Mansfield's Wild, Wild World. Earnestly sensational scientific exposés such as Psychodynamics of Unconventional Sex Behavior by Paul J. Gillette, Ph.D., and unexpurgated classics, Satyricon, Memoirs of a Lusty Roman, rounded off the list. Leo was an old columnist for the Hollywood Reporter, a squat, mischievous man. He would discover me with a book at the bar during the ordinarily vacant afternoons, and he started to joke with me about school. Leo could talk to anyone. One day he arrived lugging a fat brick of loose pages. "What's your spelling like?" he quizzed me. His company needed a person to fix galleys. Leo said he was sick of doing everything himself. For exactly $1 more than minimum wage, I signed on as the exclusive proofreader at Holloway. This was perfect, since I would now be paid double for reading at the Coach and Horses. The first titles I remember were Hollywood Screwballs and The Many Loves of Casanova. The Coach and Horses swirled with legends of famous lushers who boozed there. Hitchcock, Jason Robards, Richard Harris, William Holden. But the only star, if star is the right name for her, we ever saw was Barbra Payton. Someone, no doubt Leo, told me about the scandal. Back in the early 1950s, Payton was coming off a leading role in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye when she met B-movie actor Tom Neal at a party. Within days, she ended a relationship with French Tone, proclaiming her engagement to Neal. But believing marriage to the more prominent and accomplished Tone might advance her Hollywood stature, Payton ditched Neal, only to return again. He had a chemical buzz for me that sent red peppers down my thighs, she subsequently explained to Hollywood Confidential. But the night before Payton was to marry Neal, she contrived a date with Tone. Neal waited up for them. The former boxer smashed Tone's nose and sent him to the hospital with a concussion and fractured cheekbones. Tone secretly underwent plastic surgery. Payton wed Tone upon his recovery. She divorced him 53 days later. Neal and Payton toured in a backwater road production of The Postman Always Rings Twice, but both careers derailed. Connecting that Barbra Payton to the woman in the Coach and Horses demanded impossible time travel. Our Barbra Payton oozed alcohol even before she ordered a drink. Her eyebrows didn't match her brassy hair. Her face displayed a perpetual sunburn, a map of veins by her nose. Her feet swelled, and she carried an old man's pot belly that sloshed faintly when she moved. Her gowns and dresses looked more like antique costumes than clothes, creased and spotted. She must have weighed 200 pounds. She didn't resemble anyone two actors would fight over. Barbra Payton was then 34 years old, younger than my father. She didn't come across as bitter or angry or crazy. She clearly wasn't rich, but she always carried $10 or $20 for her drinks. Beyond the rosé, Barbra emanated a chronic self-abdication that outmaneuvered most humiliation. If a new customer of the Coach and Horses wondered whether there might be any regrets, she'd pause, taste her wine, and answer as though she had never considered the question. You know, if I had to do it all over again, I'd do the same. It's all in heaven in a little black book with neat lines. You are what you are and there's no out. You do what you have to do. She was the first person I met who spoke like she lived in a movie. She conversed through hard-boiled maxims. I got news for your baby. Nobody's civilized. You peel off a little skin, and you got raw flesh. But forever is just a weekend, more or less. She had a theory: different sleeping pills will give you different sorts of dreams. She couldn't recall any brand names, only colors. Red for passionate dreams, white for horror dreams. Barbra maintained she told this to Gregory Peck while they were filming Only the Valiant. He jotted it down. She enjoyed washing men's dirty shirts. Said she liked it, the way someone liked playing golf. I think this next poem picks up on some of the noirish tints in the Barbra Payton story, and it's called Overheard in the Love Hotel, and it's sort of modeled after the photographs of Nan Goldin. Overheard in the Love Hotel. Again the cab slips west down 14th, almost to the river. The cobbled meat market, steel grates down. A thrown-up Christmas tree lot on an old dock beyond the stalled highway. A whiff of blood and the first snow that keeps not falling. We have just checked into the Love Hotel. Film noir signatures on the register, Tom Neal, Ann Savage. Spouses discarded, even her two other lovers forsaken at the bolted door. Fading polyester roses drape the bed, matching trellis on an overhead mirror. Evening breeze out of Hoboken through cracked panes. Nothing can dispel the half-life traces of roach bone. She chases with a blunt cigar. So sexy you brought these. This is sweet, and throws a little curve into the day. Blue ice pail, absolute from a frosted cup, raking her new coil of brassy curls. Can you picture me with gray hair? My mother passed her 40s as a blonde. Now you know my true color, you and a few others. Wrapping her ankles around his, she pins him on the spread as from a room upstairs, springs rattled to a finish. It's like I'm one of them, all the passion, the ecstasy, we spend the rest of our lives trying to shake. Reflected along the ceiling, freckles from her back rotate constellations. He traces like a blind man reading a star map. You've got to see who I am. These yearnings, sometimes they last 2 years, or they can burn out after all of 7 seconds. But they're intense and very real. The wall phone rings. 20 minutes, please. I wish I could say I didn't know how they call just before your time's up, or not getting your hair wet in the shower. The towels that irritate your skin. 6-inch scar across her panty line, where last spring the surgeon scooped out her inside, reddening with soap and steam, and still stings when she wears silk. Outside, snow holding, another cab. Where was I tonight? I've been lying to Kevin about Steve, Steve about Kevin, and to Stanley about both of them. Only you have the whole story. First time I lied to you, then you'll know we're really going someplace. This next poem is called Confidential, after the magazine I mentioned in the Barbra Payton piece, Harrowing Confidential. Confidential. She wears the Sacred Heart on her sleeve, for Christ's sake. Who would have pegged it as a blackmailer? There is a photograph I used to live inside. Many have taken it one time or another. By the end, she would only step out with her cute boy reporters, the ones who wrote she was pretty, sad, and misunderstood. Love came over us, everyone said, like destiny. To give it up would be like giving up God. But listen, this is confidential. We are at the Formosa. It is no year I can think of, but in rapid succession, I'm Frank Sinatra, Barbra Stanwyck, Gloria Graham, Orson Welles. You'd think this would be fun. They're all cool, right? Plus all the sex, the love even, the yearning in those faces yearning towards me. But it's not. And not just because I have no control over who I become. Orson, Barbra, Gloria, Frank. Would it matter? But instead, I'm always too old or too young. Someone's just walked out on me, or I've just left him or her. I'm not discovered yet, or no one wants me except for who I used to be. I'm too drunk, or too fat, or too crazy. I'm in someone's office, unzipping his fly. I'm shouting, "Don't you know who I am?" And that's the problem. I always do. I know exactly who I am. This next poem is set vaguely in Oklahoma City, and it's called Deep Deuce. And the title Deep Deuce means way down on 2nd Street, and it's the old jazz street in Oklahoma City. And by the time I saw it, when I was working on the Jim Thompson book, there was really nothing left of it except a few kind of footprints and walls, and just it had been destroyed during the renewal with the plan to rebuild it, and it never was. The name Charlie Christian comes up in it, and that's the great jazz guitarist, though he sounds a bit like he's a character in Pilgrim's Progress. And you can read about Deep Deuce in Ralph Ellison's fiction, and particularly his letters on music. Deep Deuce. As phantoms direct life from the shadows, I feel I leaned on something and it broke. My father on the porch with his crossword said, "This must be what it feels like to be dead." When I returned from the dead, there was no one to greet me, but still you are glad. I wander the ruins the way my tongue wanders my missing teeth. The bricks and mortar of Deep Deuce rotted like molars in an ancient mouth. Here, Charlie Christian might have walked. The astrologer counseled patience and creative imaging. Step 1, visualize an object that symbolizes the accursed influence. Picture yourself throwing it into a furnace. Step 2, visualize the person who is responsible for the curse. Imagine one end of a rope is tied around your waist and the other around that person. Picture yourself cutting the rope with a chainsaw as you call out, "You have no power over me." Step 3, repeat twice a day for 11 days. You visualize her green boots inside the furnace. No, you're in a crematorium and you see her perfect and corruptible body on a tray sliding into fire. Then you see yourself cutting the rope that ties you together, a saw. And then at last your own imperfect and corruptible body, I mean me, calls out, and I jump in after her. I'm going to read a short excerpt from the second prose piece in the book, and it's called The Harrowing of Dorchester, and it's a memoir about growing up in Boston in the late 50s, early 1960s. If they find life on other planets, won't that mean the Bible is wrong? This was the summer after Sputnik, the summer of 1958, and my family was riding back from 2 weeks in a rented cottage, one of a colony of identical A-frames near Buzzards Bay, Cape Cod. As he drove our car along the Southeast Expressway past Braintree and Quincy towards Dorchester, my father, who reinforced his aspirations of my growing up a scientist with astronomy charts, a plastic microscope, and a vast chemistry set beyond my 6.5 years, shifted the conversation to the Soviet launch in the previous November, space travel, and the possibility of life on other planets. UFOs were our shared infatuation that year, and I joined in his car talk avidly. But I found myself assaulting him with a question that never occurred to me before. I don't know if I was confused or if I wished to confuse and test him. In the front seat, both my parents seemed flummoxed, my mother fidgety, even angry. Turning his head back from the wheel of the two-tone second-hand Oldsmobile we had waxed together that morning, my father broke the silence. "Bobby, I guess you're right." A few nights later, he revisited our drive home when he was tucking me to bed. My mother wanted him to speak to me. She telephoned the Monsignor, and he told her what I asked in the car didn't disprove the Bible. God wrote the Bible about Earth, he said. Those beings on other planets could have their own Bibles. But he sounded only half convinced. Everybody's idea of a Catholic childhood, sex, sin, guilt, infiltrated through the camouflage of the Catholic newspaper, the Boston Pilot. There were other double agents. Mary Magdalene particularly incited flustered conjecture whenever she turned up in our English reading. Each Saturday, the Pilot printed the Legion of Decency list, a classification of current movies according to their moral estimate. The infamous Class C, Condemned, probably was our earliest introduction to sex, certainly verbal sex. Along with now classic movies from Baby Doll and Never on Sunday to George and Jim, the Condemned list chronicled stag films that played Boston's combat zone, no doubt salvaging numerous pulp erotic titles from instant oblivion. Court of Desire, Mating Urge, Question of Adultery, Love Game, The Molesters, Sins of Mona, Love is My Profession, or Leanne, Jungle Guide. Condemned list movies, fascinatingly for us at St. Mark's, treated what looked like religious subjects. Private Lives of Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden, Wages of Sin, and God Created Woman, and inevitably, Magdalene. One of us chanced upon a stash of rain-soaked pornographic magazines during the walk home from school, and we raced them back to the St. Mark's playground. Fear spurred our excitement in scads of confused jokes. But as we were divvying up the photographs for private study later, some older boys bullied the pages away and started shredding. They left us with a pile of tiny breasts and vaginas, each organ neatly ripped from its body, along with the taunting explanation we could hide these more easily from our parents. By the time I reached the 8th grade, Nana was dead, and my family trailed white flood from Dorchester to suburban South Shore. After the Second Vatican Council, Mass was in English, with freshly translated epistles and Gospels, and a folk Mass for the young people every Sunday morning. But we were listening to the Kinks, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, and trying to look tough in sharkskin jackets that didn't quite tally with our red and gold school ties. The nuns at St. Anne's in Wollaston, here the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, struggled to keep up. Instead of stories about Christ, the books at the back of our classroom carried titles like Brass Knuckles and featured juvenile delinquents who renounced their gangs for the priesthood. The Reverend Walter J. Leach, Monsignor at St. Anne's, arranged the parish scholarship for me when I was accepted at Boston College High School. But because of bureaucratic snags in the funding, he told my parents they should return to him $250 cash for each $500 check he wrote us. The scandal broke in the Boston papers long after I graduated. There were many parish scholars. Our kickbacks, among other church funds, found their way to a bank account in Sweden. The money was for the Swedish missions, Monsignor Leach protested, before fleeing to Stockholm. I'm going to end with a poem called Sister Elvis. And there's a famous photograph of the Statue of Liberty, which was taken while it was being erected, and yet to be assembled face of Lady Liberty on the ground looks exactly like the face of Elvis Presley. And this poem is in the voice of a female Elvis impersonator, though not necessarily that particular one. And it's in 4 parts. And before I start, let me thank Lloyd and Joyce for today. Sister Elvis. I called myself Sister Elvis until Memphis. I called myself Sister Elvis until the night I came to in a blackout. All my life I wanted to carry Elvis's face into the future. Pretend to be filled with the Holy Spirit, everyone said, until you are. As far back as I can remember, it was drizzling and I was dreaming Memphis in the rain as I wondered what Elvis was doing. The Lord gave Elvis to the world as a gift, but when I sang, you heard his voice. That night in Memphis, there was no moon, so throwing no shadow, I must have risen sick from the motel floor. Somehow, I found my way to the bathroom mirror. I took my car keys and cut and stabbed and cut at what I saw, until Sister Elvis was just a dream and a lie. 2. Are you lonesome tonight? Elvis's body is in Graceland, but his soul is in heaven, and his spirit will always be here with us. One time on the road, Elvis stopped his car and got out. See that cloud, he asked? I'm going to move that cloud. And the cloud moved. Maybe the wind blew it, I don't know. Elvis, I'm told, only looked around and smiled. In this way, his spirit guides me. When I'm on stage, Elvis takes over. Then I become his earthly vessel. Like a priest on Sunday, I'm giving the live performance because God himself can't be there in body. Believe me, it takes a lot to stand before your congregation and pull something like that out of your soul. In high school, the drama coach cast me as an intergalactic female Elvis on a planet ruled by women. The smart fat boy who wrote the music believed he was a girl. Song after song of ancient church music, a slow, glorious drone. Years later, I heard the boy move to San Francisco, raise money enough to change his sex, and came out as a lesbian. I remember thinking it was an awfully roundabout way for anyone to go, just to sleep with girls. But who cared about fucking Elvis? I wanted to be Elvis. 3. Don't look at the guilt, look at the blood. All my men were cheap, but they were quick. My husband spoke little and only of sex, and departed in somber haste after his seed was spent. Any Christian, he said, who would allow any type of rock or country recording in her home, she's inviting the powers of darkness. Any individual listening to it, she's entering into communication with wickedness and evil spawned in hell. But God called me from a Sears and Roebuck Gene Autry guitar. He'll take my gospel to the world. The lights and the noise pulling me like a compass. In a gold vest, my long hair slicked with brill cream. I ascended the stage of the county fair. I grabbed the mic stand in my left hand, hung my other arm over the guitar neck, tipped back one shiny shoe, and sneered at a little laugh I saw him do. Elvis became part of me that day. Someone told me that at the premiere of Love Me Tender, when the character Elvis played was killed, Gladys, Elvis's mother, started to cry. But Elvis put his arm around her, said it was okay. He was right there with her. And on that cruel August morning, I heard Elvis really did die. I was afraid my voice would die too. I knew that if I didn't pick up my guitar right away, he would never sing again. So I prayed, I have sinned against you, my Lord, and I would ask that your precious blood cleanse all stain in the seas of God's forgetfulness. And that morning, God showed me his harvest fields. 4. I think what God meant to say was, look at the blood. No more tears, the music, the beat takes over. The audience and I seem to roll with it as one, night after night. Funny how you know what God means, then lose it, then find and lose it all over again. But when did I start to lose my way? But right or wrong, wasn't the Elvis trail my way? I prayed and drank and prayed, trying to make my days cancel my nights canceling my days. Until the night in Memphis, a motel so close to Graceland, coming to in a blackout of vodka and sin, and I beg your forgiveness. What I can only call the awe of it all overcame me. I took my keys and sacrificed the face of Sister Elvis, offered my own face up to him. My blood was everywhere. I keep returning to that night, the rain falling on Memphis, and coming to in a blackout, I cut and stabbed and cut. And when I was done, I looked out the window at the silent cars, the motel sign. There, in the drops of rain and crud on the glass, the unmistakable likeness. Not my slashed face, but his. His perfect cheekbones, forehead, nose looking straight at me, so pretty, and I felt safe, overcome no more. And I went outside to save all I could of his image on a paper napkin. My forever shroud of Memphis. Thank you.
Do we have books for sale? We do have books for sale, which we could probably twist Robert's arm to sign. And if you have any questions, I'm sure Robert would be happy to answer them. Yes?
We all have our celebrities that we get a little interested in. I don't know if I'm crushing Billy Jack.
On who?
Well, Billy Jack.
Okay, yeah.
Those first ones came out. How did you find out about Barbra Payton? You make her sound so lovely, but you said you said she was never bitter.
Well, I actually found out about her by reading that autobiography, I'm Not Ashamed, which came out from Holloway House in the early 1960s. And, I had already seen some of the movies she was in, and I was interested in her mainly then because of Tom Neal, who's the lead actor in the great Edgar Ulmer film Detour. So I was interested in kind of the scandal that surrounded, the Tom Neal. And there's even kind of more scandal surrounding Tom Neal, and a lot like his character in the film Detour. Years after that film, he shot his wife and went to jail for doing that, and Payton attended the trial wearing dark glasses, particularly Hollywood way. Yeah. Anything else? Oh, yeah.
Question. Your poems are about a celebrity culture that mostly, not completely, since there's one poem about Paris Hilton, is sort of in the 50s and the 60s. And I wonder if you have a sense of how celebrity culture has affected our way of looking at poems in any particular way.
Well, I mean, I think you could make a case, I guess, that the poetry world probably has its own celebrity culture.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the first thing. But when I was in Lloyd's class this morning, I was thinking a lot about representation and mediation and the way that even the world that we write about in poems comes to us through movies and commercials and to a certain extent, obviously, also other poems. So I think I would I would start with that. I mean, there's also a Bob Dylan poem in there too, which
I think of that as 60s.
Yeah, but it's actually based on a story that I heard about a woman who claimed that she's been living with Bob Dylan for the last 30 years, and I think that would be news to him. But she actually came to an event at the New School. She was trying to sell a book. She had these poems that he claimed that she claimed that he had written to her, and when I told the story to Grill Marcus, he called the Dylan office, and it turns out that she's on a list. Okay, well, thank you very much.